It's been a long time since I did a video, and I have a good reason. I haven't done a video on learning Zettelkasten, analog Zettelkasten, in a while because I haven't been using analog Zettelkasten. I was playing around with a bunch of other stuff, but the main reason I stopped using it is because I got to a point where I realized that my comprehension just wasn't good enough, and I was facing friction continually, and it just burned me out on it. So I never really had like a quitting moment. I just used it less and less until I realized at a certain point that I had just stopped using it. What you're looking at now is me starting over. And I want to talk a little bit about numbering. But before I go into the actual numbering of the cards, which is what my friction was about, I want to talk about this part of the numbering, the section numbering. Now, both of these things in some way contributed to my stopping block. And the reason I want to make this video is because I feel like maybe other people are in a similar place. So let's start with the part that's not necessarily controversial. When I was doing my Zettelkasten the first time, I was not doing academic disciplines the way that Scott Shepherd does. I was doing category-based or project-based sections similar to what Lumen himself did. That works really well, but the problem is at a certain point, you do start to, how can I put this very succinctly? If I had been making sections as I went along for projects, I started to realize at a certain point that everything wasn't separated because they were related to each other. So like I could have a section called arts, and then later I have a section called writing. Well, technically at a certain point, you put enough cards in both of those categories and you start to realize, oh, you know what? Writing is actually a subcategory of arts, or architecture could be a subcategory of arts. These things start happening because these aren't predefined categories. So I started to realize in the time that I haven't been using it and just kind of thinking about the process that this kind of top-down academic discipline approach that Scott Shepherd does is beneficial because it takes away having to think about it. You just look at where they would be. The numbering is up to you, of course, but as far as what is filed under what, you can just go and look at the academic discipline and find out where that goes and put it there. And you don't have to think about, should I put this in the arts section or is this a social section? You can just remove that part of the friction. So if you look at right here, my 1000 is social sciences. My 1100 underneath that is sociology. My 1110 under that is community sociology. And then my 1111 under that is small town sociology. And then this is where I would put a dot or a dash and start putting cards behind. The other benefit to this is if I ever want to put cards in that deal specifically with the idea of social sciences, I could put 1000 point or 1000 dash, whatever, and put cards directly behind this. Whereas when you're not necessarily dealing with that, it becomes a little more mixed and more nuanced. I don't know if that necessarily makes sense. It's not really an important part of it. I haven't had to articulate it before. But the part that was confusing, that's the minor part. The part that was confusing to me was, what do I do after that? And when I started considering going back and doing this, creating a Zettelkasten again, actually, as a matter of fact, I had all these cards made already. I just didn't number them because I wasn't sure I was going to bother with numbering, because numbering was such a problem for me before. Not at first, but as I went along. And I know that the system is supposed to be order and chaos. Everybody says that. But there has to be a certain logic to what you're doing. Even if you end up breaking the logic, there has to be a certain logic. Otherwise, every time you do something kind of like this, every time what I was talking about with creating the categories, you're always putting effort into something that should just be rule-based. Okay, this works like this. I don't have to think about it. Move on. It's kind of like this box. If I have a specific place that I store this box on a shelf, then when it's time to put this box away, I never have to think about where to put this box because it just goes in its place. But if it doesn't have its own place, then every time I want to put it away, I have to think where I'm going to put it. Where do I want it? Where am I going to find it when I need it, which is the more important thing. Whereas if it's always either on my desk because I'm using it or on its home on the shelf, then I can always find it in one of two places. And since we're dealing with addresses here, we're dealing with finding things, having that rule-based understanding is really important. And I didn't have it before. So what I did was I went back and I looked and went through the Anti-Net Zettelkasten book, trying to figure out what did I miss. Went back and watched a bunch of Scott's videos and got called the YouTube shit weasel or whatever he calls everybody now. And yet I'd never found a concrete answer. Every video that was about numbering went off in a different direction than the question that I actually had. So what I had to do is I had to sit and think about it. And I came to a conclusion of how it works for me. A way that makes sense for me. I'm not saying this is the right way. I'm not saying that this is Scott Scheper's way. I'm not saying that this is Nicholas Luhmann's way. It's probably neither. But this is a way that works for me, that makes sense to me, and I don't have to think about it anymore. And if you're one of the people who feels the same way, that is not getting the answer you want to understand the numbering, maybe this will help, because I'm going to try to keep this as simple as possible. If you go to the Nicholas Luhmann archive and you look at his actual notes, you will see that some of his addresses get super long like this. 23-3A1P5C4F and longer. This is just one of the ones that I grabbed. And what this tells me right away is that this multiple dash or multiple period thing that Scott does, he didn't get from Luhmann. This is something that makes sense to Scott. This does not make sense to me. I started very quickly with just the cards that I have there. I started getting into addresses that look like this, which told me in a year they could get to this very easily. I don't know that that's a flaw in what Scott's doing here. It's clearly a flaw in what I'm understanding about this, because he talks a lot about these being new branches, but I don't really understand what the criteria is for something to be a new branch, because in my understanding of the way the Zettelkasten works, every single card is potentially a branch. That 21-3A is a branch. 21-3A1 is a branch. 21-3A1P is a branch. The only thing that defines them as a branch is if another card comes after it, as far as I understand it. So there's either something missing in that explanation, or I'm just very bad at comprehending it. And I have to tell you, I am autistic, so sometimes certain things just don't click in my brain, and unless it's explained in exactly the right way, it might never. And this may be one of those cases. But when I went back and I saw that Luhmann only did this once, I prefer periods instead of dashes, because I think the dashes are too easy to confuse with ones and L's. So I like to do periods because there's no letter or number that looks like a period. But when I saw that he only did one separator, which in his case here, he often would leave off zeros. These were insinuated 4-digit numbers. So technically what we're looking at here is not 21. It's actually 2100. He just left off the 2 zeros. So he would be looking at this level. of a card. So when I saw that he did that, then I realized that trying to figure this out was just confusing me. So I had to make sense of this for me. And what do I mean by that? Well, we have multiple things here. So we have our initial card. We have 21.3. Now, after 21.3, we can have a 21.3A, and there's also 21.3.1, and then 21.3A1. Okay? I might not have made this sound easier, but this is going to make sense. I just want you to see the options we have available. I haven't said anything about how these things function together. This is in the way. Okay, we know that this comes first within these. Now the question is, what is my subcard here going to be, and what is the condition that I subcard off of this? Well, it would be 21.3A, because we're alphanumeric, right? Or numeric alpha. So number, letter. I know that Scott uses the word variant. That confused me. This is just a sub point of this. So a way to think of these for me is to think about them as paragraphs in an essay or an outline, or to think of them as lists. If this is groceries, this is meat department. So this is an example of this. So if this is an idea, what comes after that is examples or furthering of the idea underneath it. Okay? That much is pretty clear. I understood that before. The question came with these. Now, what I would do if this was groceries and this was meat department, produce department would be 21.3B. So everything at this level is going to be part of, if we're talking about it as lists, as part of this list. If these are bullet points, these are all bullet points underneath this level. If this is H1, this is H2. Okay? This is going down one more. So this, if this is groceries, this is meat department, this is steak, this is chicken, this is pork. So these are examples of this. This is examples of this. Where does this come in? Where does this fit in? This was one of the things that was confusing me so much. And now, like I said, what I'm going to tell you now may not be the way that Lumen did it, may not be the way that Scott Shepherd does it. This is the way that makes sense to me. This goes here. Because to me, this is a sub or a continuation of this card. And what I mean by that is, this is an example of this. This is an example of this. This is not an example of this. This is when you have a thought that doesn't finish here and continues on to the next card. So in other words, this is part one, this is part two. This is not an atomic idea. I know it's not really a Zettlekasten term, but it does apply here. This is not an idea in and of itself. It's only half of this idea. So by putting the point there, I'm saying these cards actually belong together. And for all intent and purposes, you can think of them as stapled together, or you can think of them like this. One side, the other side. They are the same idea. That may not be how they're using them, but this allows me to make sense of this, because there are times when this needs to carry over. And within this system here that we already have here, the numeric alpha system, wrong way, I did not see a way to do that. Because if I wanted to continue this idea, it's a little weird to take it down to the next level. That would be like in a outline, putting the first half of a paragraph on this level and then the second half of the paragraph indented under it. You would put the whole paragraph together. But because these are limited space, I'm using 3x5 here as an example, just because I didn't want to waste my 4x6s, but we're limited by space. So needing sometimes to carry over, this is how I make sense of that. And just understanding that, not thinking about that second one much, and just letting things accumulate in the alphanumeric manner means that I'm going to end up with addresses more like lumen and less like this, which confuses the hell out of me, and to be honest, gives me a headache to look at. So this is how I'm making sense of it, and if you were confused, hopefully that makes a little more sense. Maybe let's do one more example just to make sure. So we called this groceries, produce, so forth. Let's say this is American football. This would then be the Dallas Cowboys, a team in American football. And this would be Dak Prescott, quarterback for this team in American football. Okay? Oops. Sorry, I picked the wrong cards there because I wasn't looking. Should be this one, and then this one. Team, sport, team, player. If I have things to say about American football, maybe this is American football and I need somewhere to put the definition, this could be a good place to do that because it's a continuation of this, but it's not really a sub point about it. You don't I don't even know if you have to worry about these. To be honest, if this confuses you, I would say don't even bother with this. This is just how I'm making sense of it. You could just, anything that you want to, put it underneath. Yeah, it doesn't make complete sense. The most important thing is make the rule and stick to the rule as much as you can. Let the chaos evolve when it can't be contained by the rules. But if you can operate with the rules more often, whatever they are, whatever rules you define, the easier it's going to be because you don't have to deal with that friction of going, where does this go? How does this work? Just assume this is how it works until the times when it doesn't, and then let the system be flexible. Because one of the things that Scott gets very right when he describes the Zettlekasten is even if you screw up, it's still going to work. And for someone like me, that was very hard to accept, which is why I started over. It's actually the second time I've started over. So I'm back on it right now. We'll see how it continues. But I just wanted to share that so that maybe it could help somebody who is confused. And hopefully I didn't confuse you more.